It's very easy to factor this polynomial simply just by trial and error. But we have to follow the instructions here, and the instructions say to factor the polynomial by grouping. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is factor a 4 out of the entire expression. So that leaves me with 4 times x squared plus 10xy plus 25y squared. This 4 is going to be on the outside for the remainder of this problem. I'm going to factor this trinomial using factoring by grouping method, and this 4 is just going to be on the outside for the remainder of this problem. Okay, so I'm just going to write it over here. Okay, so the coefficients of these terms here, a is going to be 1. That's the coefficient that's in front of this x squared. B is 10. C is 25. Okay, and the first thing you do when you're factoring by grouping is you multiply a times c. A times c, that's 1 times 25. That's 25. Okay, so now we're looking for two numbers multiplied together that's going to give us 25, but when you add those two numbers together, it will give us this coefficient, which is a 10. And those two numbers would be 5 and 5. So I'm going to write the first term down, x squared. And then I'm not going to write 10xy. I'm going to leave some space here. And I'm going to write the last term of this trinomial, which is plus 25y squared. Okay, so those two numbers that we came up with are going to fit in here. And instead of me writing 10xy, which is the middle term, I'm going to make this 5xy plus 5xy. That still comes out to be 10xy. It's just written another way. Okay. Now, I'm going to go ahead and factor this 4-term polynomial by grouping, and I do that by factoring the greatest common factor out of the first two terms, and then I'll factor greatest common factor out of the last two terms. So the greatest common factor of these first two terms is going to be an x. And the greatest common factor of the last two terms, that's going to be a 5y. Okay, so if I factor x out of the first two terms, I'm left with x plus 5y. And if I factor a 5y out of the last two terms, that leaves me with an x plus 5y also. Okay, now what I want to do is factor the common binomial out of this entire expression, and that is x plus 5y. And if I factor this x plus 5y out of this first part, I'm left with just an x. And if I factor it out of this last part, I'm left with 5y. And that's the complete factorization of that polynomial.